Welcome to another episode of Artist Spotlight, the podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Stringer. And as always, the podcast is brought to you by your friends at the Maryland Photography Alliance. You can check out everything they have going on by going to their website at mdphotoalliance.org. A great website to go take a look at. There's always contests and events and get togethers, and so many camera clubs work with the Alliance. And it's just a terrific resource. If you've checked it out one week and you come back a week later, odds are there's a lot of good new information to dig into. So, as I mentioned, my guest today is Michael Chinnici, a New York-based photographer. He's an author. He's a photography workshop leader, and the author of a phenomenal book, Vanishing Cuba, which if you enjoy travel photography, cultural photography, you're interested in Cuba, its people, its cultures, or you just like great photography, it's just a phenomenal book. And with that said, Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for the compliments. Appreciate it.
Yeah. I was first aware of your work, as so many people become aware of anything nowadays on social media, and specifically when your Vanishing Cuba book was coming out, and the promotional activity around that, understandably was, full speed ahead to make people aware of what was coming out. And I tell you, well before I owned the book, I was just so incredibly impressed with the images and just the apparent quality, which later proved itself out, of what you were putting out. So maybe we can just jump out with, how did that book become an idea? How did it ultimately become a finished work?
Well, I mean, the book became an idea because I was asked by so many people, you have to do a book. You have to do a book on Cuba. Um, the book came to life at the beginning, actually about a year into COVID. I said, okay, maybe it's time to do the book. I would always tell people, yeah, when I get 3 free months, which is almost never, I'll do a book. And that would have never happened because the book took a better part of a year to do. Uh, at that point, I had, I think, 24 trips to Cuba. Now I think I'm just close to 40 trips. When you do, I think, that many trips and you have that volume of work, you've met so many people, made so many great relationships with people, and there's really great stories to tell. It made sense to do a book. So that's really how it came to be. Yeah, my first book. There are three editions to it. I kind of took it to a silver deluxe and a reserve edition, which is just, it was just, when when you're going to do something like that, now's the time to do it. If you don't do it, then you're never going to do it, because when you offset print, you can't do that kind of stuff. So yeah. I think the other thing that I think took longer to do than usual was, I didn't want to do a standard photo book, which, it's often like you walk in a gallery and you see a photo on the wall, and maybe there's a little thing there that says where the photograph was taken, et cetera, et cetera. But um, I really wanted there to be stories. And that kind of came from Instagram. A lot of people told me on Instagram, I love your backstories. I love the stories. And that's where the book kind of felt even kind of like it was going to make more sense to even do, which I'm glad I did. And that writing took a long time to do. So, selecting, I think when you're curating pictures, that's a tremendous job in itself. But then when you're writing content to go with it and making sure that it flows properly, et cetera, was quite a bit.
Yeah, and I know when we had a phone conversation, I mentioned to you that the detail that you provide for really each photo to give context for it for a viewer is incredible. You can certainly glean what you can just looking at an image. As they say, it's worth 1,000 words. But when you provide that detail and that insight and that context for a viewer who's never been to Cuba, or like someone like myself who has, I think that magnifies the impact of the image. And it's just remarkable, the detail across hundreds of photos that you've included in the book. And I think it adds a tremendous amount to its impact.
Yeah, and you know, I come from a marketing background, and there's always that thing called see and say. I don't always necessarily visually have to say what the words say. And when you think about purists doing a photo book or an art book, um, you really don't do that many words because the image is left in the eyes of the beholder, whatever the person thinks. It's just, again, like you walk into a museum or a gallery. However, I think the backstory really add to it. And I hadn't thought about it. It wasn't premeditated. It was just kind of unfolded. Because of that, though, what's very interesting is the book is in every Ivy League university's library system. It's in libraries across the world, like Cambridge and Oxford, and just so many because of the content. Because so I urge anyone who is going to do a book, even if it's a small run digitally produced book on your own, um, think about adding context to it. And you mentioned about the detail. I tried to balance between talking about an emotional experience that might have happened in that particular photograph. Maybe I walked into space and I really didn't expect anyone to be there, and then somebody was, and the encounter. And that's one thing. But then if I've also got an old car in a building, I might tell you the year that building was built, and I might tell you the year of that car, and give you maybe some more detail about that car. So that's a nice balance of going between the emotional and the facts.
Yeah, definitely. You're giving, the word I used earlier is context. You're really giving context for most everything that's in that picture. So the person, really may understand that that building was built in 1925. That car is 1952. And that car was passed down from someone's great grandfather to now the person who's driving it today. So you really get this very rich history of almost everything in the scene.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's true. It's true. And there's a lot of stories to tell in Cuba. It's a tremendous, I always tell people from a photographic standpoint, you're a kid in a candy store with a culture and a people who is welcoming of you and really loves for you to take their photographs. Um, so it's yeah, and along with the deep history and the kind of lost, I mean, in time, which is what we have. We're seeing less and less of that now in Cuba, but yeah, it's great.
As someone like yourself who leads workshops around the world, you would be very well positioned to answer this question. I've run into people and they talk about either where they're about to go or where they've been, and they say, "Yeah, I've been to this place, check, been to that place, check, been to this place, check," like they're checking boxes. And so my question to you is, if a person were to go to somewhere in India or Cuba or any of the other places that you've been or that you lead workshops to, what would you say that you would find in successive trips that you didn't see or come to learn in that first trip? So if you're just interested in checking off boxes, which there's nothing wrong with that, it's good to see a lot of things, but there's only a certain level of depth you can get in one trip, 5 days, 7 days, 10 days. What are those things in trips two through, whatever, that you think that visitors can take away that they can't after just that first week there, wherever that is?
Yeah, it is. It's a great question because it's a difficult question to fulfill, I think, if you're running a trip in a really great way. Because I often say that, so for instance, if someone's going to Vietnam, I say, well, you know what? It's probably the only time they're going to go. They may never go again. They may love it enough where they'll go again. Often you have a checkbox, check it off and that's it. Go back again. So one of the things that we do on our photo trips are we do bring in the culture, we do bring in the cuisine. We want you to experience it fully. Photographically, we coined the phrase photocentric, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, 10 years ago. And yeah, the trips are 80% photography, but you've got so many other things that have to come into play. You also, as the leader, you get really good being a leader somewhere when you've done it numerous times. So the more times you do it, the better. But it's also, think about it from a creative standpoint. This is anybody who's creative will get bored. Often I think about musicians in bands where they have to play the same song over and over again. They have to do the encore with the same song everybody wants to hear, and they've got to do it the same exact way people hear it on the record. Um, And that's hard for them to do. But if they veer from that, then it's not what people want. So we try to do our trips probably about 80% of the way we did the previous ones. But every time we do a new trip, we always find new things. And then you have to sit there and go, oh, well, is this better than the other thing? You got to start to pick and choose. And you've got this really great curated trip. But at the same time, you come across new things that you want to show to people. And sometimes you even have a guest who, I mean, I've had guests, for example, Cuba's a good example where I've had some guests that have been there 3, 4 times with me, 5 times with me on, say, private. You know that they've been somewhere, so you're going to be a little bit more conscious of giving them a little something a little different than that. So I'm not sure that answers your question, but you do. We try to incorporate many different aspects of the experience. Photographically, yeah, you try to also harness the whether it's the energy or you try to harness the best things about a trip. Like if we're gonna continue to talk about Cuba, Cuba is not this place where you'll find the greatest landscapes. There's a few landscapes in my book, but it's not somewhere where you're going to focus on that aspect of it. You're going to focus more on the street photography, the documentary, the people, the portraits, things like that. It's going to skew more in that direction. You're doing Patagonia, you're doing Scotland, it's the reverse,
Mhm.
obviously.
Sure, sure. Now, and you mentioned that you come out of a marketing background. So, was photography something that was with you prior to your work in marketing, or did that come along with marketing, or when did you first kind of find photography? I know I guess your father is the one, I guess, who introduced you early on. Is that accurate?
Yeah, my father was a jeweler and had lots of hobbies like model airplanes and fishing and all kinds of things. But there were always cameras, always Nikons laying around. And yeah, he gave me his Argus C3, I think it was, from his Army days. Yeah, played in the dark room, probably at 11 or 12 years old. But being a photographer is not something that you know people make a living at. It's very difficult. So when it came time to go to college, it was like, well, I'm going to be a photographer. I don't know. Do I really want to be a photographer? Have a portfolio? Be an apprentice for 10 or 12 years under some famous photographers, maybe 15 years, and then maybe at some point, maybe I'll be successful. Um, I decided to go, I was also an artist, so I decided to go more into design and marketing, and that's what I pursued. I had my own advertising agency in New York, but in 1996, invested in one of the first digital studios in New York City. So that's where the photography started to really start to come into my life. And it wasn't until later, this was like, 2007, 2008, where I said, you know what, I think I want to mix together, my photography, my life in photography, travel, mentoring, my marketing knowledge, all of that, and create a small group company, which is Photo Workshop Adventures, if I'm going to drop a name, that really focuses on giving people an amazing photographic experience through travel. And you can only do that with really good digital cameras. You couldn't do that before with film. It's very hard to do. If you're in Santa Fe and there's a school there, yeah, you could do it. You go to the dark room, things like that. But
Sure.
actual travel, where you try to jam pack as much as you can in 6, 8, 10, 12 days, digital really made that a possibility.
Well, when we decide we're going to travel for photography, and I don't mean, Africa or some of these countries where you're typically going to have long lenses, et cetera. When you're traveling and the focus really is more along the lines of street photography, cultural photography, some landscape photography, and you kind of head out the door, I think we all have our our go-to kit. And I know that a lot of people who are listening and people in general would say, I don't even know what I would leave the house with. I've got this camera and maybe a backup camera, but if I'm going to have street photography, portraits, maybe some landscapes, what do I even bring? So When you're heading out, maybe whether it's to lead a workshop or it's just yourself, maybe you're doing like a reconnaissance trip. You haven't been there before, but you know that it's more so street photography and landscapes than, you're not going to photograph animals. What tends to be your setup that you get on the plane with?
Yesterday I just finished one of my New York Soul the Streets long weekends. I do those about 3 times a year. And I shoot with Fuji now. I've shot with Fuji for the last 10 years when they went mirrorless. I shot the entire weekend, 4 days with the Fuji X106, which is a fixed,
Mhm.
20, essentially 35 millimeter fixed by 35 millimeter standards. Um, you force yourself into that system. Yeah, I also had my other cameras, but I chose not to on this particular trip.
Mhm.
Um, Typically, you will find me with two cameras hanging from me. For the last probably 12 years, that's the way I've shot. I I find that most people that walk around with backpacks and other lenses in their backpacks, after a while, they don't take the backpack off their back anymore, which is why I use like a sling bag. They don't even change their lenses because they get tired, even though they know they should change the lens and you go back and forth. And of course, every time you change the lens, you're taking the chance of dust getting in. So I've always shot with two cameras. Typically, I shoot a lot of wide. I love wide. And that even goes back to like having an old Hasselblad film camera with super wide film camera, um, which wasn't a fisheye, but it was really wide. But I always got a wide on one. That could be anywhere from maybe about 18, 20 millimeter to up to say 25. Uh, and then your typical 24 to 70 or 24 to 105 kind of lens, which is going to give you everything from somewhat wide to normal to a great portrait lens. And I might carry in my bag a longer lens, which is going to probably be more of a kit lens because I'm not going to have the f-stop on it that I want, but it's there if I need it.
Mhm.
Um, and then I'll use that to shoot longer stuff. Now that's when you're going around and you're doing typical, street photography and travel photography. If you're doing stuff where you're going to need a longer lens, you can have a longer lens with you, and you're going to take the time to carry it with you, whether it's 70 to 210 or 100 to 400 or whatever it might be. So I think it really kind of varies. When you go into the evening, you're going to go to maybe a smaller prime lens with an f1.2, f1.4 because you're worried about low light. So you carry that stuff with you. I mean, I typically will travel with two camera bodies and about 6 or 7 lenses. But like everything else, I mean, I love to fly fish and I've got more fly fishing gear than I know what to do with, but you always go out there with the same couple of fly rods and the same amount of gear, even though you got all the other stuff, that you thought you were going to use, but you never used.
I always tell
So,
people, when they are considering moving from one camera system to another, that it's the greatest opportunity to get rid of all those lenses that you thought you'd use.
yeah,
You used once, and that was it.
yeah,
So I was recently in New York, and I was shooting with that Fuji X106. And as you said, I've got the two tone, the silver and the black version. Um, and I have that because the all black they didn't have available at that point in time. But it's kind of a wrinkle on the color scheme anyway of what I think every other camera I have is that.
I've had all the silver ones until now. Now I have the black one.
Okay, yeah, you've done the reverse, but yeah, their cameras are just they're just fantastic, and as you said, having that essentially 35 millimeter, the camera weighs almost nothing,
Yeah.
and so that's not an issue, and you can just go, and it's a lot of fun. It
Yeah.
really is.
And somebody who shoots pretty wide like I do, that's the issue I have there. Sometimes I wish it was a 28 millimeter, a little wider, but then you're also going to do a little more distortion. So, there's a reason why they went through 6 models of that camera and never changed the lens on it. So, it is what it is. And like I said, if you want to go, if you, I have an iPhone 15 Pro Max, which I can shoot in RAW wide if I really want to get it. It's not going to compare to the Fuji or to any camera, in my opinion. They're amazing. They're great for social media, but that's the extent of it. So
Sure.
I maybe sometimes I'll pull that out, or I'll just wish I had the wider, XT5 with me or something.
Now, with you having published the Cuba book, are you a person who, in addition to leading the workshops, do you do much with prints, with large prints, or is that not that big a part of what you do, making those and maybe selling those or licensing those? Just out of curiosity.
I sometimes sell prints. Like the reserve edition book comes with 3 prints with the book, but sometimes I make prints. I had planned on having prints for sale on the website when the book went for sale. I haven't really had the time to do it. Um, Eventually I will, but when you're doing documentary and travel photography, uh, portraits of people, nobody's really buying prints for those. I
Mhm.
mean, if you're doing fine art, abstract, landscape, things like that, people might have a desire to have a print, a large print or something. But again, when it gets to people, the street, documentary, not going to sell as many prints.
It's a much more limited audience for sure.
Absolutely. Very,
Now,
very difficult. Yeah.
with you capturing so many images, just going everywhere that you're going and everything that you're doing, whether it's for a book or it's just for future use, what is your process to back up these images? Because many people, they're I guess maybe it's at the worst scenario, their pictures live on their computer.
Yeah.
Others will have an external drive, and they'll just add little external drives as the last one fills up. What's your strategy to hopefully keep what you've got and not have it go away through some glitch in some kind of hardware?
Well, I'm often surprised. Less these days. I think equipment's become less expensive, and certainly memory has become less expensive. But sometimes I'm surprised that people come spend really good money on travel on a trip, great cameras, and then they cut corners on memory cards and backup and things like that, which to me is really kind of does make sense. Um, what I do is on the Fujis, for example, I shoot lossless compressed. So I get probably about twice as many images than if you weren't uncompressed or if you were uncompressed. Um, I shoot on 128 megabyte fast cards. There's the difference shooting faster because you really get the most out of the camera itself. Great processor in there. From when I shoot video with it, I need to have a very, very strong memory cards and a couple of them for backups. Those memory cards, there's 2 of them. So there's A, B, and 2 cameras. So there's A, B here and A, B there, 2 different cameras. And in the evening, they all go onto a Samsung solid state drive, usually 4 terabyte. I travel probably with 3 of those. Sometimes I get stopped in airports, like Cuba's a good example. What are you doing with so many hard drives? It's like, um, whatever. So, everything goes over to the hard drive. Um, Everything's organized in a format I use for no matter what country I'm in. Same format, same naming convention, if you want to stay organized. And then from there, it's imported into Lightroom. It's imported into Lightroom while I'm traveling. It's imported on a travel, how can I say, travel catalog in a sense. What I'm doing right then and there, because when I return, I am now putting it on my desktop, and I'm really doing my serious editing on the desktop. It's kind of hard to do while you're traveling and you're busy 14 hours a day. So everything goes on a server, a RAID server, which is also backed up. And then everything's going backed up to the cloud as well. And those memory cards do not get wiped out until I do the next trip, or at least for like a month. I make sure everything is where it needs to be. And if you really want to be, if you really, like, if you're shooting a commercial job for a client, you've got two different drives, and you're always traveling. And I've done this on long trips. I'm traveling for a month. I'll have everything on two different drives, and the drives will never be in the same place. It'll be in two different pieces of luggage. Maybe one will physically be on me at all times, or at least when I'm traveling on a plane, and the other is never in a check bag, obviously. And I've even in the past, when I've done heavy shooting for a very long period of time, shipped a spare drive home. Just, and if hey, something could happen to that drive, I get it, but it's just a spare drive, as a backup. So when you think about everything, all the time and money you're spending on all of this, and of course, to redo it you probably wouldn't do it.
Mhm.
So, yeah, back it up.
Yeah, yeah, that could be a T-shirt for photographers. Back it up, and then the other piece of advice might be don't delete images in the field in real time.
Yeah, I sometimes I see people with their camera, they're looking at they're like this and they're
Yep.
deleting. What are you doing? You're deleting. So first of all, you're looking at a little LCD screen. You don't know whether that image is as sharp as the image before it. And you know what? If you're wasting the time to zoom in and look, you're missing photographic opportunity. So sometimes people say to me, "Do you look at the image after you take it?" Yeah, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But I'm also in a different position. I know I'm going back to that location at some point in the future,
Mhm.
probably a year later, it could be 6 months later. And I get to take that shot again, where not everybody gets that luxury. So, but yeah, deleting images with memory so cheap, it does make sense.
So this is a two-part question, and you'll understand why it's almost like two sides of the same coin. So, with you being an experienced travel photographer, experienced street photographer, workshop leader, when you walk into an environment that you're not familiar with, it could be you're walking into the streets of Old Delhi, let's say. Now, I'm going to sort of position both sides of the coin question. So, what I'm going to ask you in a moment is what is it that from when you first step foot there, what you start looking for, what you start kind of honing in on? The other side of that coin is when you have a traveler with you for the workshop at that same environment in Old Delhi, just got there the first time. From your experience, what are they looking at, and how does that differ from what your answer will be as to what you're looking at? You've got one experienced person and one inexperienced person dropped into the same situation that is so full of photos to be made, it's hard to even put a number on. So maybe if you can kind of compare and contrast those two perspectives.
I don't think there's one answer for your question.
Mhm.
It's a great question, but there are multiple answers to that based on various scenarios that may unfold. There are times where I've said to guests, wait here for a second, shoot around here. I'm just going to take a walk around this corner here. I want to see something. Um, because I don't want to waste their time in a sense. Or I might ask, a local guide that we have to do something. Um, Usually the places I'm going to, we pretty much know. There are new experiences, as always, that unfold. And even if it's the same location, the situation could be different. Something could be closed that's normally opened. Something could have no lights on it when there's normally lights on it. If you're talking about twilight or something like that, or night photography. But I think, you also need to know who your guests are. You need to know how experienced they are. Get a feel for that. Some people are more verbal about it than others, but once you know that, and once you get a sense, you can say to someone, "Hey, this is what I would do here. Why don't you take?" Because you also want people to have a different perspective on things, and that's one of the things that I enjoy viewing myself is the way you enter a location or enter a place, and then how each person kind of, looks at it differently and heads off in this, it takes 10 steps this way or 10 steps that way. Um, and so it's kind of cool. Often though, you gravitate towards very, very similar opportunities.
Mhm.
And then a lot of times, look behind you because there's opportunities behind you too. So sometimes people are a little too fixated on things and don't necessarily do that. And I've got to tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, look around, look over there. So I think it depends. I think you want to be as much an educator as possible, but you also want to give people the freedom to explore on their own. And then after they've explored, maybe you'll also direct them. I'll also sometimes give advice like this. I will say things like, okay, I don't know this space that we're in. What I might do, but I see some people over there, and I really love the way they're dressed. I really like the shot. I love the shot. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert myself in their presence, but I'm not going to take their picture. And I'm not going to take an environmental that includes them. I am going to just insert myself and take some pictures to the left or to the right. I want them to be comfortable with my presence. And then once I've gained that, that might only take a minute or two or three. Once I've gained that, then I might turn the camera on them and ask them, or have a conversation with them and ask them. I've had people where I've asked to take their photograph and they say no. And then I start to have a conversation with them. And then once I finish the conversation, and it could be just a minute conversation, I say, hey, sure, I can't take your photo. And then they say, sure, you can, because now I've broken the ice. So, I try to teach that as well to guests of ours.
Yeah, and I've mentioned on previous podcasts that when there is a language barrier, it's amazing though. Sometimes just smiling and just, facial gestures and, trying to be polite, even though you're doing that without the use of words. Sometimes people really respond to that.
I can't know everybody's language. It's impossible.
Yeah.
I try to learn a little bit of a language, and I try to learn some what would be an inside joke or something that they know that I have to have some knowledge of their culture to say something. And then when I do that, I might get an amazing laugh from them, and then they know that I'm just not a stranger. But I don't know their language, and I can't know their language. I don't want to learn their language. You take
Yeah.
India as an example, 22 official languages, 112 recognized, and over 12,000 dialects and languages. It's amazing. But we sometimes there are places we go where we go village to village and we have to use a different local guide because the language changes.
Well, I know from years ago, I know a certain amount of Spanish, but I'm very clear that it is a certain amount of Spanish, and it is not greater than that. It's but having been to places like India and Japan and some others, that's completely foreign to me.
Yeah.
Just and when you have signs that are rightfully only in the indigenous languages writing,
Yeah.
it's not English and that language. I mean, sometimes you just look up at a board. It could be a train station, an airport,
Yeah.
and you've got no idea what you're looking at.
So you take Spanish as an example, or whether it's Cuba or whether it's Spain or other countries in South and Central America. Um, in Cuba, in particular, a charming older gentleman could be called a mango. So, and I'm older. I'm not gonna say I'm old. I'm older. So sometimes after talking to an older person, I might say, mi mango viejo. I'm an old mango.
Yeah.
And they'll laugh and laugh and laugh. And I'm clicking
Right.
away while
Right.
I'm laughing. And so that's a slang. I've just very, very brief thing. I've introduced some slang into that comment, and it goes over very well. So,
Yeah. That's great.
yeah.
Well, you've had this terrific Cuba book, and then I understand now that you either are or you may be putting together a book on India. Is that something that's in the works or might be in the works?
Uh, I think that'll probably be the next book. It is in the works. I just don't have it's kind of like, again, a musician saying, yeah, I've got an album I've been working on for 8 years, but I haven't recorded it yet.
Yeah, no, and that's kind of a good position to be in that it's not like you have had to fit the publication into a specific window. So you've got the luxury, if you want to call it that, of time. And it kind of sets my question up well with, having done the Cuba book and knowing the mechanics of getting a book done, and a really nice one at that, you certainly want to meet or exceed that with the India book. So as you have travels to India coming up, as you've had travels to India, do you have in your mind almost like a shot list so that on the next trip you're looking to add to and supplement what you already have? What's the mindset when you're sort of in production? I don't mean literal production when it's being printed, but
Yeah,
just
no, and
development stage.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Um, Cuba unfolded in an easier way because Cuba is just a great subject to do a book on. Um, it's a much smaller country. I mean, it has one religion or no religion, and it has, it's just a different thing. And there's been so many books done on India that you have to ask yourself, would I really go there? Doing the Cuba book as a self-published book, and I clearly went over the top with it. Yes, I have said to myself, it has to compare to Cuba, otherwise that would be I'd be doing myself a disservice. But I did go so far over the top of the Cuba book that we have to see about an India book. Yes, a greater population to even sell the book to, if you're going to try to sell to the Indian population. But but I think the thing there is that when you like, I didn't want to do, some people do book on cars, people do a book on a particular subject. Even in the book, they might do chapters on specific things. I didn't even do that with the Cuba book. It's really all mixed around, which people have loved. I even mixed black and white and color photography in there, which I was very concerned about doing it properly, because as a purist, you might say, well, you do all black and white or you do all color, but you don't mix them. And that was a tricky one, because I knew I wasn't going to do two books, and I didn't want to just do all black and white. So, um, but what has happened with India has been, people have said, the Cuba book's amazing, but we know your India photography and you have to do India because I even like it better than your Cuba photography. So you're kind of like, okay, all right, yeah, you're kind of getting pushed in that direction. But you can't do India based on all the different cultural differences. You have to do multi-volume set. Impossible. Yeah, you might say, you know what? I'm missing this. This has to be in the book. A shot of this has to be in the book, or similar, or this festival, this experience. And so then we'll start to maybe have a shot list. Um, but again, it's such a big uh, project to do from a standpoint of the content, that you have to be careful that you don't go, in too specific a direction, and also don't worry that you're not getting every single thing that could possibly be in the book. The book's supposed to be an experience. One of the things that I didn't, again, having never done a book before, I have watched Cubans cry over the book, both in happiness and in sadness.
Wow.
Wow, you make my country look so beautiful. They know it's not as beautiful, maybe, but realize that I'm a photographer. I'm seeing things a certain way, and I'm choosing to put this in the book, which is a mix of beauty and a hard life, for sure. And others will cry because they find the sadness that exists. And of course, in all countries where there's poverty, most people don't even get to see their own country. And until about like 7, 8 years ago, you couldn't even travel from one province to another without getting permission in Cuba. So people, they're seeing it sometimes for the first time. But what the overwhelming thing that came through was, and still continues to come through, is I feel like I've been there. I've looked at your book, your complete book. I've read it, and I feel like I've been to Cuba. And I think that's ultimately what you want to do. So if I can make people feel that way about a book to India, then I've succeeded, whether I've gotten everything or I haven't.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one thing that I have felt is that street photography in some of the countries that we're talking about is very different than street photography in the US. You mentioned you just recently had a workshop you led in New York City. So, from your perspective, Do you feel there's differences between being on the streets in, whether it's Cuba or India or somewhere else, and let's say New York City? Do you think they're more similar than they are different, or do you think that it's just a fundamentally different shooting experience?
It's a fundamentally different shooting experience. You have to also respect the culture, the cultural differences. Um, in Cuba or India, you can take pictures of children all day long. No, people in India will bring their children to your camera lens and say, "Please take a photo of my child." It's like something they're happy about. And you're certainly not going to do that in Central Park in New York. You'll be in jail. I mean, I'm getting ready to head to Portugal and Morocco in a couple of weeks, and then I'll be in Turkey uh, a month later. Spent a fair amount of time the last couple of years in Italy, in many different provinces of Italy. Well, if you just take those examples right there, Morocco is a much more difficult country to photograph in, and you're talking about a country that has really perfected tourism for the last 100 years. But they're also more savvy and less they look at it, they look at you as a photographer, as somebody who's making money off of a calendar you're producing, something like that. But if you go to the rural areas, you won't get that at all. You'll just find that in the Medinas of Marrakesh or Fez, and you'll find it less outside. So you have to understand those cultural differences and where you can press the boundaries. Turkey is amazing as far as people welcoming you to take photographs, but you also have to, again, use respect. And if you go to a country like Italy, it's sort of somewhere in between, the other thing too is that when you are photographing, say like you're photographing in Rome, you'll have a different experience than if you're photographing in Napoli, in Naples, in the Spanish Quarter of Naples, where everyone is just very jovial about everything. And especially if there's a festival going on, everybody's happy at a festival. More difficult to photograph in certain respects, but you almost get everybody. You can go to Coney Island and take photographs of joggers on the boardwalk, but go there during the Mermaid Parade, and everybody wants their picture taken. So that's another thing that you kind of think about when you're going to shoot.
Yeah, I was in New York City during this past Easter parade, and you talk about people wanting you to take their picture. I mean, it was, yeah. I mean, you almost couldn't take pictures fast enough for the next person wanting you to take their picture.
Yeah, like I mean, we do like Oaxaca Day of the Dead.
Okay.
I mean, and Americans tend to think it's Halloween, Mexican Halloween, and it's not. It's the celebration of life with celebration of the dead, whether it's friends or family or children or the ones that didn't have anybody. They're kind of left behind. But everybody there, whether they're in makeup or not in makeup, is just in a great mood and loves to get photographed. And so you just end up with so many more photographs than you even imagined.
Sort of reminds me of being is talking about India during Holy Fest. And I mean, that is, that has a whole series of challenges that go along with that. But people wanting their picture to be taken, there's no shortage of.
Yeah. And another thing that I did and I tried to do, people say to me sometimes, how do you know all these people in the book with Cuba? Yes, there are many people that I've become very good friends with, dear friends with. But I also make it a point when I photograph someone who I think is I think it's got really great potential. And I want to know more about the person. I really want to know what why they dressed the way they're dressed or what they're doing, and I try to get their information from them. And sometimes it's me, and sometimes it's an assistant or a guide we have, and we keep track of their name. If they're older, we even get their age. We get some, different information that can be used, whether it's in a social media post or whether it makes its way from social media to a book.
So with you having the experience that you do, when you meet someone or someone asks you how they can get more comfortable photographing people. You know, you have people who are real enthusiasts and they photograph around their community, they photograph their family. They may be the quote unquote family photographer because they always have a camera, but now they're either out with you or they're just out somewhere on their own and they say, I don't really feel comfortable photographing people that I don't know, even though they're very interesting. And I don't want to, you know, kind of be like a sniper taking pictures, but I also don't feel comfortable asking for permission. Is there a, is there sort of stepping stones towards getting comfortable that you've seen work historically?
It goes back to what I said earlier about making your presence known, making, feeling comfortable, et cetera, et cetera. And again, respecting, like in New York City and Lower Manhattan, for instance, if I veer off into Chinatown, I have to be careful about whether people there are completely legal or not. And if they're not, they don't want their picture taken.
Sure.
And that's actually disrespectful to them as well. So you have to be, your mind has to change different to where you are, what you think is going on. Also not interested in photographing people's poverty, or they're down and out, they're homeless or things like that.
Mhm.
Um, I think you have to really use there are boundaries to those things. But like I said, often it's a matter of so on this the other day in New York City, there was a guy who had really funky hair, colored hair. It was fun, and I just said to him, "Hey, can I take your photograph?" And right away he was like, like this,
Yeah, yeah.
and so that was great. And then, but he was with some other people who then it started to go over to some other people going, and so it just kind of unfolded. But you made that happen by interacting.
Mhm.
And yes, I get it. Again, if I'm walking through Central Park and there's a bunch of families playing, I am not going to probably look to take their photographs. It's just not something that's going to happen in that situation. That's just it's I think the way you have to address that particular moment in time. And they're all
Yeah.
different. So going to these countries where you are off the beaten path and like tribal areas, whether you're in Africa and Asia, et cetera, um, you will come across people who will just be like, no, you're not allowed to take my photo. Some of it's religious, some of it could take you to Guatemala and we can photograph Mayan people, but there are certain elderly Mayan people who it's actually superstitious. They think that if you take their photograph, they're going to have a curse put on them. So
Yeah.
once you know that, you need to be aware of it.
You know, as photography and travel photography becomes increasingly popular, you know, you have these cultures like those in Ethiopia's Omo Valley, where they were extremely remote, and they were, you know, remote at a time where very few, you know, people like Art Wolf and other cultural and wildlife photographers may have photographed them literally 40, 50 years ago. But now it's become a little bit more, whether you call it mainstream or more common for people to be traveling there. So, have you seen in any of the areas that you've gone to over time how increasing amounts of photography have fundamentally sort of changed those cultures, at least somewhat?
Yeah, over photography, over tourism is a problem, for sure. It means we have to hunt for more authenticity. Even in an Omo Valley's great. There's many great photo opportunities. You've got really good guides. You have to be really careful not to come away with images that look like everybody else's images. And you're really, or we'll say go to Varanasi in India and shoot sadhus. There's lots of sadhus, and there's a bunch that are out there all the time and they work with different local guides, and you'll see the same sadhus and the same images by different photographers. So there's setups, and there's setups that are, in my opinion, become too commercial. And I think that is the job of whoever you're hiring to take you places, or if you're doing it on your own, using some discretion there and trying to be as authentic as possible. Try to go off the beaten path and find opportunities where you won't find it. But I mean, over tourism is, I mean, go to Iceland. Iceland was a different place 10 years ago. just 10 years ago. Um, you know, I can take you remote areas of an Iceland in the highlands where there was nobody there 5 years ago, and now you'll go and there's, a dozen people and a whole bunch of drones flying around.
So with technology,
That's all because of the phone and Instagram,
well,
which which
you're
is good,
right.
which is great, which is really great. But that has you really, pushed that forward big time.
There's an expression, something to the effect of no one's ever had a bad day on social media when they post about themselves. So, with that comes a desire for people to say, look at me where I am, but I guess for every person who takes that look at me where I am picture and then they're ready to leave, um, does it, I wonder to what extent does it stimulate the traveler who, yeah, they'll probably take that picture, but that's just like when they first get there. They really want to be there. They want to learn about it. They want to be kind of a really earnest traveler and not the social media influencer type, traveler. I mean, do you see a lot of the people who travel with you or others that are they knowledgeable about a lot of the places before they go, or do you think that they really rather they learn while they're there?
Both, but more so they learn while they're there. I think you have a much younger audience that knows more about where they're going. I think they're in their 20s and 30s. Many of our guests are 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on. And that leads to another thing about that iconic shot. Some people want to get that iconic shot, whether it's the Taj Mahal or whether it's, a shot from Yosemite, and I get that. I get it, but I often say, I don't really want to take a picture that there's 100,000 other pictures just like it on the internet. I mean,
Right.
to me, it doesn't do anything for me. I have taken them. The blue beams in New York, we did it the other night. Well, they were testing them because it's still not the 11th 9/11. And so it's nice to get. It's a good educational experience to wait for the blue beams to come on and try to capture them in twilight and do post on it so that they look the best they could possibly look, et cetera, et cetera. And you have different vantage points that you can do it. But at some point, you're there with 50 other photographers and everybody's getting pretty much the same shot.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I like to find stuff that's, again, more unique.
It reminds me, well, probably years ago now, I'm dating myself, but if you went to Disney or some of these places, they'd have the Kodak photo spot. Stand here. This is the
Yeah,
picture. Take it and move on. Yeah, but
yeah,
it was
yeah,
it was kind of, I think,
yeah.
and then it went from the Kodak photo spot. Then at one point it was the Fuji photo spot. Who knows who they've now licensed.
And so I get it. I mean, the Taj Mahal, for example, in India is just an incredible architectural marvel.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
is stunning from so many different angles. There are some angles that are definitely more interesting than others using a certain kind of lens. Whether you're shooting from the river or you're shooting from down below or whatever it might be. And these are kind of the things you try to show people, but then you also can put people in the shot too to give more context to it.
Mhm.
And sometimes those are just tourists, or sometimes they're people who you might say, hey, do you mind walking through here because you've got a beautiful red, scarf on or something might be. So yeah, those things, when we try to do tribal stuff, when we're doing tribal stuff, you're always looking for that really beautiful face or the very interesting face, probably with light eyes, maybe light blue eyes, green eyes, things like that. And in a beautiful setting. And that's the kind of like, that's why I came here. I came here for that shot, you know. Um, but chances are nobody else will have that shot because you would have had to stumble upon the same person, as other people did. So those become, I think, iconic in the emotion that it creates in the shot, the feeling, everything that's there. But again, it's not the Statue of Liberty from this Kodak point of view.
As technology continues to move forward and brands are upping their game, or in some cases just making changes for maybe change's sake, are there some fundamental enhancements in gear that you feel over the last 5, 10 years have actually made a substantial difference for us to be able to capture images either more easily or the quality of them? I mean, it's the camera, as we all say, it's a tool. You have to have the eye, you have to understand the exposure triangle and just all these kind of things. But just in terms of technology itself, what are some things, if there are any, that you feel have really been a significant step forward?
Yeah, I don't think cameras and lenses have changed dramatically. I'll get to answer that a little bit more in a minute. The digital camera phones we have improved significantly, and as people get tired of carrying cameras, they're getting older, they don't have their camera with them. That, from a technology standpoint, has led to some really nice images being taken, again, more for social media than not. I mean, you could even shoot video now in cinematic mode, and it'll automatically change from the focal area, from the rocks in front of you to the whatever's in the distance. So those technological advancements are great. In post, the post editing side of this has really improved. There were images that went into my book that saw some re-edits from 6 years prior. And if I were doing the book now, there'd probably be a few more edits. I don't do any photoshopping. I don't drop skies in. I don't do anything else like that. If anything, I do minor enhancements, tweaks here and there. But those have improvements in noise reduction, improvements in sharpening. Be careful how much you do those things, et cetera, et cetera. On the camera side of things, also even equipment like tripods have just become so much lighter and less expensive to take. There's no excuse to not have a tripod with you if you think you might need a tripod. But when you look at the cameras now, you take somebody who has a 7, 8-year-old DSLR or first generation mirrorless, look at the fact, we'll talk for a second about the all-in-one lens Fuji X100 which again, I did all of New York on. You just said you took it to New York. You've got the IBIS as far as stabilization going on in there. And you've got what in the first model, you had a 2-stop ND filter. Now I think it's either 4 or 6-stop ND filter.
Yeah.
So you don't need anything to slow down the light in daylight. You don't need any ND filter on it. You can do everything from there. And built-in image stabilization in the camera, where you've got this floating sensor that's giving you stabilization, as well as possibly even image stabilization happening on the lens side and maybe working in conjunction with the sensor, allows you to go how many stops down. So the idea of wishing for a 1.8 zoom lens, which is highly unlikely, or a 1.2 zoom lens, you can effectively get a lot of image stabilization coming out of a longer lens that's maybe f3.5 to 4.6.
Mm-hmm.
So, are you going to go shoot that at night without getting a grain? Of course you're not. But we're getting there. We're getting there. Yeah. I mean, AI is a big problem. I think AI is a really big concern that's a whole separate conversation we can have. But in some instances, the AI is really helping out. Mm-hmm. And that's another thing too, to be able to shoot on a street and capture a moment that's happening in a flash in front of you and have an autofocus go right on someone's eye in just microseconds is incredible technology.
Oh, it is. It is. So as people are listening to the podcast, certainly they're going to be thinking about, what to consider if they want to go on a guided workshop, wherever that is, but things to consider. So, what would be sort of your advice when someone is kind of considering who to travel with, or just traveling with an experienced guide or entity versus just kind of going on your own, having a travel agent book your flight, maybe your hotel, you'll go there and you'll talk to the concierge at the hotel. What's your, this is going to sound like an advertisement, but at the same time, I'm asking you genuinely.
Yeah, I won't give you an answer like an advertisement.
Yeah.
That's not fair. but of course, that's one of the things that we tell people all the time. And look, somebody who doesn't want to come with a group, or somebody who can't afford to go on a group trip, it doesn't matter. They're going to go on their own. So it really is not the same person. I think if you really want to learn about something and you want to be fast forwarded to great destinations or opportunities, you want to be with like-minded people. That's a big plus.
Yes.
Big plus. A friend of mine in the travel industry that I grew up with said to me many years ago, he said, do you ever have any problem guests? And I said, once in a while we do. He said, you know why? Because you have like-minded guests on there. Everybody's there to have a great time and do photography. Nobody's there with their family, doesn't want to be there, I think. So, but anyway, like-minded is important, and you're learning. You come away, I want you to come away inspired more than anything. If you come away with some great photos, that's great too, and you will. But it's the inspiration that I hope to lend to you, as well as learning certain things that you might be able to do on your own at some point. But when somebody has curated everything for you, and is basically taking you through that and trying to maximize the amount of time being spent in the given day, hours of light, or even sometimes not light, sometimes it's after hours. It's incredibly valuable, incredibly valuable. I feel it is. And also small group, like our trips, we go maximum 6 people. Sometimes we go to 7 people. There's a big difference between that and 10 and 12 people. 10 or 12 people with a leader and an assistant, a local guide and a driver. And, you're all sitting down 14, 15 people to have lunch or dinner, which will take, an hour longer than everything else. And they're just, you don't necessarily get the same out of it.
Well, and I can just share my own experience that when you travel in a small group, I've made friendships with people all over the world, and we compare notes on where this one's going or where that one just went. And you may not see each other, either face to face again, or it might be 3 years until you see that person. But you build these friendships that just winging it wouldn't really allow you to do. And as you said, it kind of fast forwards you towards making the most of your time there. If you have limited time, which most of us do when we travel, making the most of it is important. So, Michael, for everybody who is listening, who wants to follow up and follow your work and take a look at what you have going on, what are the best ways for them to do that with the internet and social media?
I mean, certainly you can find everything through me. If you looked at Michael Chinnici on Instagram, and you go to my, the internet link, you can find everything about me there. Photoworkshopadventures.com is our company. It's a big orange box. Either says PWA or it says Photo Workshop Adventures. There you can look up our leaders, and you can get to me from that. So it's any way you want can be that way. And your comment about friendships, I mean, our registered trademark is may all come as guests, leave as friends. And we've got quite a few long friendships that have come from that, which is really nice.
Yeah, it is. It is super cool. And as you said, you've got like-minded people, and it's just, sometimes it's when you're not shooting, when you're at meals or you're back wherever you're staying and you're just sitting around talking, or maybe you're by a campfire, that is as valuable and maybe more so
Yeah, the other
than
thing
the
that
pictures.
what we do is we actually create a WhatsApp group during the trip, for communication, and people will share images, even candids, group shots, things like that throughout the trip. And then that doesn't really go away. It remains for further conversation after the trip has ended. And sometimes we even do virtual calls, virtual Zoom calls afterwards to, not everybody does all their edits on a trip. It's pretty hard to do. Less and less people do edits on a trip now. So sometimes we do a follow-up later on via Zoom, and it's great to see everybody's different perspective. And I love it when I see shots that are awesome, and I'm like, damn, I wanted to get that shot. How come I didn't get that shot? You got that shot. So I love it when people get really wonderful photographs that I didn't see, and then of course they'll say the same to me. And I think that's one of the things you also learn. You learn about that. I started off doing, when we started this 14 years ago, uh, I did a thing called Shoot the Damn Fire Hydrant, which came from a 14-year-old girl who approached me at the time and said, I got a new camera from my parents. What's the one thing you can tell me that would make me a good photographer? And I said, one thing? Great question, but no, I don't think I can do that. And I said, I'll tell you what, I want you to pick a subject. I want you to pick a subject that you wouldn't normally photograph. Well, let's say a fire hydrant. You walk by a fire hydrant, you never ever think about taking a camera out, take a picture of it. But I want you to photograph that fire hydrant with every lens you have. I want you to photograph it on different days, in different light, from further away, from close up. Maybe the kids have turned the water on, whatever it might be. You photograph that. Then you come back and look at those images. And I bet you're going to find a handful of images that not nobody taught you. You pulled out of that fire hydrant, whether it's a crusted nut and bolt or whatever it might be that you got out of that fire hydrant. And you'll find a handful of images that you'll be like very proud of. And what did it teach you to do? It taught you to find, to hunt for the image within. And you can do the same at a car show, photographing cars. You can do the same on travel photography. All those things play into your learning experience. So often you can be guided, but this is a lot about teaching yourself as well.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Well, Michael, I appreciate your generosity of your time and all the insights that you shared. I know that everybody's going to be able to get a lot out of that. So I want to thank you for being on the program.
My pleasure, Mitch. Very, very much. Thank you.
And I want to remind everybody they can check out and see what I have going on if you want to go onto the website at mitchstringerimages.com. And probably the place to go to get the most updated information is Mitch Stringer Images on Instagram. Until next episode, I wish you great light and I wish you great shooting. Until then, take care.